Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 510 for the 29th of July 2018. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia, up nice and early to record the Skeptic Zone. It's good to be up nice and early because it's before the flight path opens. In about an hour, I'm going to get A380s and all sorts of planes flying over the house, but for now, peace and quiet. And 24 hours ago, I was up nice and early to watch the blood moon. It was a spectacular sight with Mars not too far away. I know many listeners around the world would have seen this event, and it was just beautiful. I don't think it compares quite to a solar eclipse, the lunar eclipse, but nevertheless. Coming up on this week's show, what an interesting story we have for you. And I know some of you have been following this. It's about a poster, a pro-vaccination poster created by the Northern Rivers vaccination supporters, has gone viral, been tweeted and Facebooked and whatever else you can imagine. We're going to be having a report by our very own Heidi Robertson, the raw skeptic, who's going to tell us all about how this poster has infiltrated the internet. And undoubtedly, it's getting up the nose of the anti-vaccination crowd, and we'll be hearing a bit of news about the anti-vaccination crowd. They've changed their name here in Australia again. Now, they're called the Australian Vaccination Network. That's their core name. And some years back, they were forced to change it to the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network, I think, to get up the nose of skeptics, but there you go. But they've changed their name yet again. Apparently, some of their people weren't happy with the use of the word skeptics. There you go. Have they changed their name to the Australian Conspiracy Network? No. Find out what they have changed their name to a bit later on in the show. And coupled with that, we'll be bringing you some news about a new movie coming to Australia. This anti-vax crowd are supporting. It's called Sacrificial Virgins. It's about the Gardasil vaccine, which has been a staggering success. Absolutely mind-blowing how good this vaccine is in preventing cervical cancer. But the anti-vaxxers want to have it stopped. Anyway, news about that coming up a bit later on. Also in this episode, our guest reporter from time to time, Trish Hann, who will be talking about why you should be skeptical about certain apps designed to help you with contraception and timing and things like that. When is a good time? Well, it's always a good time to listen to Trish Hann, our guest reporter on today's Skeptic Zone. And we catch up with Beth Darlington, one of the speakers at the upcoming Skepticon here in Sydney on the 13th and the 14th of October. And Beth has been into ghosty research and paranormal research for quite a long time. And she'll be joining me on a panel with Sam Hutchinson, Sue Blackmore, and Kerry Poppy from the Oh No, Ross and Kerry podcast. Lots of people, a big lineup for this year's Skepticon. More news about that at the end of the show. Now, here's a follow-up to last week's show where I was telling you about two things. A poster doing the rounds of my area of Sydney, the inner west, warning of geoengineering. It was a large poster plastered up around things like underpasses and things like that. I took a photograph of it and reported about it. And when I went back to have another look, they'd all gone. And I had another look at another location, and there was some left. Plastered over paid advertising space for iTunes, I think, in this case. I noticed one of the posters was starting to peel off anyway, so I thought, well, why not? I took the opportunity and scored the poster. I noticed the next day they'd all gone again. And Apple had come by, the people responsible for the advertising had come by and removed them all or placed new advertising on top of them. So they were all gone anyway. But in the meantime, I managed to get one. I've got it right here in the studio, and it's really big. In fact, I'm going to have to buy a frame for it, something like 90 centimeters tall by 60 wide, something like that. Quite a big poster. Anyway, it's going to make an interesting addition to the Skeptic Zone studio. And the other thing I mentioned last week in a similar sort of doom and gloom vein was a flyer that had ended up in some letterboxes warning of a tsunami to hit Sydney on the 20th of September. Well, I was walking downtown just yesterday, George Street, the main street of Sydney, near Town Hall, and there was a guy on the street corner with a loudspeaker, little amplifier and a microphone, and behind him was the poster warning of the tsunami on the 20th of September. Here's a little audio grab of what he had to say.
We stand before a holy God, and there's nothing you can say, there's nothing yet you can do in the eyes of a holy God to justify your life when you come before the throne of God at the end of days. For it is given unto men once to die, and after this a judgment. We shall all stand before the throne of God, and you will be held accountable for the way you live at the end of days.
Now, he carried on like that for some time, probably hours, I would expect, because I went away and came back about an hour later and he was still going. The only leaflets I managed to find, and it was hard to talk to him, of course, because he just was raving on. They were other people handing out little leaflets here. There is life after death, Jesus loves you, heaven or hell. These look like a couple of them here. The problem, everyone is in the same position, separated from God, yada, yada, yada. And they look like generic flyers. So I'm not sure which particular group is behind this. It's interesting. Maybe listeners might be able to find out. Anyway, tsunami on the 20th of September. Watch out. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and have a little bit of breakfast, I think. Why not? I'm going to have some toast, sourdough toast, of course, lightly buttered, a little bit of smoked salmon on top of that, maybe a fried egg or a poached egg on top of the salmon, a little bit of jalapeno mustard, which I discovered a couple of weeks ago, which is delicious, just a bit, just for flavour, pepper on top with a cup of coffee. Are you all visualizing that? I am. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
It's the Raw Skeptic Report with Heidi Robertson.
Hello everyone, this is Heidi Robertson. This past week, a pretty weird but welcome chain of events took place relating to our community group, the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters. It illustrates both the power of social media and the, at times, seemingly random nature of it. It also served as a reminder to us that so many people are, in fact, in support of vaccination, and that's a fact that can be temporarily forgotten in the madness of the day-to-day struggle against the anti-vaccination movement here in the Northern Rivers. So, to this weird chain of events. On our website, nrvs.info, we have a selection of posters and graphics freely available for anyone to download and print out. Back in 2016, one of our administrators, Dr. Rachel Heap, wrote a poster that had a confronting message. She put it on our website and also uploaded it to our Facebook page. I'll get to what the poster says in a minute. But at that time, back in 2016, the Facebook post had a few shares but didn't really make much of a ripple at all. It so happened that a nurse over in Colorado in the USA saw this poster on our Facebook page, contacted us to see if she could use it, to which we said yes, of course, and then we promptly forgot about it, but she went to our website, downloaded it, printed it off, placed it in a frame and hung it in the waiting room of the doctor's surgery where she worked. 2 years later, just this week, on July the 21st, a patient at that surgery called Sunny noticed it. She took a photo of it and then she uploaded it onto her personal Facebook page and her Instagram account. So what does this poster read? Here it is. The title is "Not Vaccinating Your Kids Leaves Them Vulnerable to Disease Their Whole Lives." When your daughter gets rubella when pregnant, how are you going to explain that you chose to leave her at risk? What will you say when she calls you and tells you she has cervical cancer because you decided that she wouldn't need the HPV vaccine? What do you tell your son when he breaks the news to you that he cannot have kids thanks to the mumps that he got as a teenager? And what do you say when he gives influenza to his grandma? How do you explain that she won't be coming home from hospital? Not ever. Do you tell them that you didn't think these diseases were that serious? That you thought that your organic, home-cooked food was enough to protect them? Do you say sorry? And then it's got a link to our website, www.nrbs.info, down the bottom of the poster. So then what happened was one of our followers saw Sunny's post on Facebook and told us about it. We went to her page to have a look and saw, to our amazement, that it already had 12,000 shares just from her own personal Facebook page. But when I last looked just a couple of minutes ago, and today is the 27th of July, it had nearly 200,000 shares just from that one person's personal Facebook page. So we got in touch with Sunny, and she's now a proud member of our group. Our friends at Light for Riley reposted the poster on their Facebook page, and I'm told so did many other pro and anti-vaccination Facebook pages all over the world. Dr. Pan, a tireless pro-vaccination campaigner in California, posted it, as did George Takei with his 10 million followers. Side note, I had to Google how to pronounce Takei, and this is the correct pronunciation, according to the man himself. Other outlets that shared our poster or wrote about it include Bored Panda, news.com.au, the New Zealand Herald, the Daily Mail, the Northern Territory News, a site called Now to Love, another called The Stir, and it's on Reddit. In other words, our poster went viral, which, as one of our followers aptly said, is just about the only thing that is okay to go viral, especially in the pro-vaccination advocacy arena. We received a bunch of emails through our website, mostly supportive, some decidedly not. We had doctors and nurses overseas ask if they too could also print them out for their waiting rooms. So I'll read out the first interview that Dr. Rachel Heap did with Mamma Mia. Quote, "The pro-vaccination sign written by an Australian doctor going viral worldwide," by Helen Vanook, July 24th, 2018. Sunny Mariah was at her doctor's office in Colorado when she noticed a sign up on the wall promoting vaccination. So she took a photo and posted it on Facebook, commenting that the sign was, quote, "throwing some serious shade." Within a few days, the post had been shared more than 130,000 times and had sent anti-vaxxers into a fury. What Mariah didn't know was that the words on the sign had been written by a doctor from Australia, Rachel Heap. Dr. Heap is an intensive care specialist who works in the Northern Rivers region of New South Wales. In her spare time, she politely and respectfully does her best to correct misinformation put out by, quote, "professional anti-vaxxers," end quote. It's tough work, but she keeps at it. Quote, "The ghosts of the people that I've looked after keep driving me," she tells Mamma Mia. Those ghosts are her patients who have died or suffered horribly from vaccine-preventable diseases. In a 6-month stint working in a kids' intensive care unit, Dr. Heap looked after babies with whooping cough. 2 of those stick in her memory. There was one baby who spent 6 months in intensive care and may have been left with permanent brain damage. Quote, the other one didn't make it, she says sadly. Quote, those are 2 of my ghosts, but I've got countless, endless other ones, because people don't count the adults. The 28-year-old guy who died of late complications of whooping cough. The people who have died from influenza. Young, healthy people, as well as the older and more frail. Name a vaccine-preventable disease other than polio, and I've seen it directly. How can I not continue this fight? And no, I'm not paid for it. Most of the people in the pro-vax field, we do this in our spare time because we are passionate about protecting the vulnerable." End quote. Dr. Heap, who is one of the founders of the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters, wrote the words on the sign about 2 years ago. At the time, there was a lot of debate about the no jab, no pay policy. Quote, "I kept hearing loads of comments about the parents' right to choose and stuff like that, almost like the kids were possessions," end quote, she remembers. Quote, "To me, it's all about the rights of the child. These diseases can impact on their whole lives. You don't get to choose whether your kid wears a seatbelt. There's stuff in place to protect children. You don't own your children. That upset me," end quote. Dr. Heap had just come off a, quote, pretty tough spell in the intensive care unit. Quote, "We look after people dying of influenza. I've looked after people with complications of cervical cancer. We looked after a guy with mumps. The two things kind of hit together. I did a rant from the heart. It's the truth as I experience it, as I live it, every day," end quote. In the rant, Dr. Heap wrote that not vaccinating children can leave them vulnerable to disease their whole lives. And then it goes on to quote the poster that I've already read. She posted her rant online and pretty much forgot about it. A nurse from Colorado contacted her to see if it was okay to print it out and put it up in their doctor's office. It was from there that it went viral. Dr. Heap admits that the tone of her words is a bit different to the, quote, polite and respectful tone generally used by the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters. Their approach is to help educate people so they can make informed choices. Quote, "I don't usually throw shade. That's not really what we do. But once in a blue moon, the emotion gets to us," end quote. Dr. Heap and the rest of the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters are going to keep working away in their spare time to correct misinformation about vaccines. That involves, quote, trawling through crap online. It also involves talking to friends and neighbours, an approach they call 1,000 cups of tea. Quote, "We live here. This is our community. These are our friends. I don't want to see the neighbours' kids come down with measles. I don't want to look after people in ICU that I know. So we keep going." End quote. Obviously, our poster got a heap of negative attention as well, but I'm not even going to go into that because listeners to the Skeptic Zone podcast are all too familiar with the same anti-vaccination tropes that are always served up to us, the pro-vaccination advocates. And there was nothing new to be read in the comments sections along those lines, just a lot of angry ranting, which we don't worry about. You, dear listener, can help fight the misinformation out there, starting with just speaking out in favour of vaccination, making it normal for others to hear that we go for our annual flu shots or that we've just taken our kids for their booster shots. If you don't feel like you can speak out in favour of vaccinations because of the social pressure, especially if you are in a region of low vaccine uptake, don't worry. You're not alone and it takes time. You can lend your support by following us on Facebook at Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters, on Twitter at NRVax Supporters, that's VAX, and you can get all the information you need from our World Health Organization endorsed website, nrvs.info, where amongst the downloadable posters and graphics, you can also read the common myths and realities of vaccination. If there's something there we haven't addressed that you'd like us to, or if you just want to chat, feel free to get in touch with us for support via any of those social media platforms. Till next time, this has been Heidi Robertson, signing off for now. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Sue Blackmore. I'm a visiting professor in psychology at the University of Plymouth in England, and I'm really looking forward to coming to Skepticon 2018 in October. I'll be talking about my new book, Seeing Myself, The New Science of Out-of-Body Experiences. And this is really the reason that I ever got drawn into skepticism in the first place, because I had this incredible experience and I couldn't understand it. So I was determined to become a parapsychologist, and I did my PhD in parapsychology, did loads of experiments on ESP and telepathy and all these kinds of things. And, then the evidence made me change my mind. I joined PsyCop and got involved in all the skeptical movements of those days for a couple of decades. So, things were very different in those days, and I'm looking forward very much indeed to finding out a bit more about modern skepticism on the other side of the world. And I hope that you will enjoy hearing the new science of out-of-body experiences. The neuroscience is fantastic, and we can now understand just why and how it is that so many people are convinced that they've gone out of their body when they're really still inside. Ooh, hang on a minute. They're not really inside, are they? I mean, there's not a soul or a spirit or even really a conscious self in that. Well, that's some of the very interesting things I hope we'll all be discussing in October. And I hope to see you there.
Meet Professor Susan Blackmore at this year's Skepticon, the Australian Skeptics National Convention. October the 13th and the 14th, the Concourse, Chatswood. Tickets at convention.skeptics.com.au. Some years before the Skeptic Zone started, and the show started in 2008, I attended a public talk given by the Australian Vaccination Network. I think it was called Making Choices. I've still got the video. This was way back in 2002. It was a talk that Peter Bowditch from the Australian Skeptics, otherwise known as Ratbags, and I attended. And it was a real eye-opener. And that was where I was called, afterwards on a blog, a Mouseketeer, only evil. During this talk, we were told that the World Health Organization, through its vaccination program, were worse than Hitler and Stalin. And large injections of vitamin C could fix just about anything in the emergency ward at the hospital. And over the years, with Dr. Rachie Reports and Heidi Robertson, we've been keeping you up to date with the activities of the Australian Vaccination Network, which changed its name some years ago after pressure from the government to the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network. And now we learn, published on the 24th of July, they've changed their name again. The Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network, formerly the Australian Vaccination Network, will now be known as the Australian Vaccination Risks Network, Inc. In a statement on their website, they say, "We have heard from so many in our community that they did not feel comfortable with having the word skeptics in our name. And believe me, we totally understand why. What you might not know is that we were forced to change our name by the New South Wales Fair Trading Department because they decided it was misleading." Well, imagine that. But you can read more about this here, and there's a link. And then after this is a little, like a dictionary insert. Skeptic, noun, skeptic. A person inclined to question or doubt accepted opinions. The Australian Skeptics and other skeptical groups, organisations around the world, have taken a word that means, quote, a person who questions accepted opinions, end quote, and warped it into, quote, those who do not question accepted opinions and attack those who do, end quote. I see. So, no longer wanting to have our name potentially confused with the, quote, anti-skeptics, end quote, we listened to your comments and applied to change our name to one we feel is more fitting, Australian Vaccination Risks Network, Inc. We think, quote, risks, end quote, is great because it covers the risk of injury and death that come from vaccines, the risk of vaccine ineffectiveness, the risk of vaccination policies that put the protection of the vaccination program above the children it is supposed to protect, the risks that come from vaccination dogma instead of real and non-industry linked science, the risks of conflict of interest in vaccination programs and those who are in charge of these programs, the risks of removing informed consent and choice from individuals and parents, and much more. We will be updating our website, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and Instagram accounts to our new name, but will probably take a couple of weeks. If you see any places we miss out in the next few weeks, please let us know and we'll fix them up as soon as possible. We hope that you are happy with the change and we look forward to taking the Australian Vaccination Risks Network, Inc. into the future. Well, this little bit of a window dressing doesn't really change anything. It's nice that they've dropped the name or the word skeptics from their organisation. It's unfortunate that some media still run to these people for thoughts and opinions and comments, but nothing like they used to do, which is good. And as we'll hear in a moment, this organisation is promoting the film Sacrificial Virgins. Here's a story that comes to us from the Sydney Morning Herald Online by Dana McCauley, published on the 25th of July. False and reckless. Health Minister slams anti-vaccination documentary maker. Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt has slammed a controversial anti-vaccination documentary ahead of its Australian launch, warning against, quote, fake and reckless claims, end quote, targeting the government's cancer prevention program. Quote, the science is in and the medical experts' advice is absolute. Vaccinations save lives and protect lives, and they are an essential part of a healthy society, end quote, Mr. Hunt told Fairfax Media. Quote, I have no time for the false and reckless claims made by anti-vaxxers, and I will continue to call out their dangerous claims, end quote. The film Sacrificial Virgins, which opposes the Gardasil vaccination program and claims that HPV does not cause cervical cancer, will screen at 7 locations across Australia next month. Immigration Minister Peter Dutton would not rule out denying entry to British filmmaker Joan Shenton when she flies in for screenings. It is understood that Ms. Shenton, who has previously argued that HIV does not cause AIDS, is yet to apply for a visa. Doctors have criticised the film for peddling unhelpful information and spreading fear about a program which the vast majority of medical experts regard as safe and effective in preventing deaths from cervical and other cancers. The Gardasil vaccine, which was invented in Queensland and protects against the forms of the sexually transmitted human papillomavirus, HPV, that causes about 90% of cervical cancers, is included in Australia's national immigration program for girls and boys aged 10 and older. The local anti-vaccination lobby is promoting the film screening with the stated aim of having the HPV vaccination program suspended from the national immunisation schedule. The founder of the Australian Vaccination Risk Network, and we remind you that they used to be called the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network, and before that it was the Australian Vaccination Network, Merrill Dorey told Fairfax Media the film contained reliable information from top experts in the field of science and aluminium toxicity, end quote. Quote, has the minister even watched the film? If he hasn't, how can he possibly make criticisms of it?" end quote, Ms. Dorey said. She pointed to class actions against the Gardasil vaccine's manufacturer in countries around the world and claimed that the federal government was failing to provide Australians with all the facts. Should the immigration minister refuse entry to Miss Shenton, as it did last year when the self-described, quote, "world's #1 anti-vaxxer," end quote, American teacher Kent Heckenlively was banned from the country, it would amount to an attack on freedom of speech, she argued. Mr. Hunt said every vaccine on the national schedule was subject to strict safety testing before it could be registered for use by the Therapeutic Goods Administration. Quote, "The TGA also undertakes ongoing monitoring and assessment of vaccines to ensure they are safe and effective once they are in use in Australia," end quote, he said. Quote, "For a vaccine to be listed on the National Immunisation Program, it must receive a positive recommendation from the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, the independent medical experts. Gardasil has both the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee and the TGA approval, giving it the green light for safety and effectiveness," end quote. And again, that story comes to us from Dana McCauley at the Sydney Morning Herald, written on the 25th of July 2018, with links in this week's show notes. And I have a funny feeling we're going to be hearing more about the screening of this movie, Sacrificial Virgins.
Kyle from the Data Skeptic podcast. If you're curious about the way data is changing our world, topics like AI and all this craziness with Facebook and bots and the Twitter storm and how the algorithms that underline that work, and you don't want a technical deep dive, you want it in the vernacular in a way that people can understand, check us out at Data Skeptic. That's what we try and do. I interview advanced professionals in the field who do this sort of research, and then I get into interesting projects as well. We're a weekly show, and you can find us at dataskeptic.com.
It seems there's an app for everything nowadays. My smartphone does all sorts, from controlling my finances to boiling my kettle. It wakes me up in the morning and tells me how active I've been during the day. It knows my blood type and my wish to donate my organs. It's hardly surprising that millions of people willingly input vast amounts of personal health data into their phones and let the software do the number crunching, rather than the old-fashioned way of thumbing through a ledger or calendar. Women have been logging their menstrual cycles in calendars and diaries for ages. Awareness of your own body and its functions is hugely important. It makes it easier to spot when something is wrong, but also allows you to predict what's likely to happen in the near future. On top of this, not all women menstruate, and not all who menstruate are women. And when a person's hormone levels change significantly due to starting or stopping medications, biological changes, or other outside factors, keeping an accurate log of menstruation can allow a person to have a more in-depth analysis of their health. So why am I telling you about period tracking? Well, in recent years, several technology companies have released apps which claim to be as effective as hormonal contraception, often breaking health regulations in doing so. They claim to be able to tell you, usually using a traffic light system, when it's safe to have unprotected sex. This is a really bold claim, and in the fine print there are plenty of caveats, while on the Facebook pages there are plenty of posts from women about their digital contraceptive failures. So when the app tells you that you are in a fertile window, couples are either meant to abstain or use a barrier method and hope that doesn't fail. Some of these companies use the standard days method to calculate these fertile windows, but this method is only appropriate for people who fit a very strict criteria. They must have very regular periods, and their cycles must always be between 26 and 32 days long. Many women fit this criteria generally over the course of a year, but the length of a particular menstrual cycle can be extended or shortened by stress, trauma, strenuous exercise, diet, all sorts of influences. Some of these companies add an air of legitimacy by providing a basal body temperature thermometer with a subscription. The idea being that you take your temperature immediately upon waking up, and then the app crunches the numbers and tells you when you're ovulating. The biggest risks with this type of technology is that no two bodies are the same, and we are all capable of mistakes. Simple things like taking your temperature after brushing your teeth, accidentally leaving the thermometer by the window to heat up during sunrise, oversleeping and taking a reading while getting dressed. Got young kids, do shift work or frequent international travel? Good luck having a regular sleep cycle. Add to this the fact that sperm can survive for several days after intercourse. Various factors can delay or expedite ovulation. Not everyone ovulates at the same point in their menstrual cycle, and some people ovulate from both ovaries per cycle with a gap between ova. You can see how these apps should only be used by couples who are prepared to get pregnant at any point during their use. These natural methods have been heavily criticised in medical journals such as the BMJ's Sexual and Reproductive Health, the Journal of Contraception, and the Journal of Reproductive Health. But one of the biggest drivers behind using these technologies is an aversion to hormonal contraception, which many women feel, especially those who may have been taking them for several years, even decades, and experience unpleasant side effects. Everyone experiences hormonal contraception differently, and for some it's what makes life worth living, especially those with conditions like endometriosis, while for others it affects them very negatively. Historically, there have been numerous health scares associated with nearly every form of hormonal contraception, with increased risks of everything from stroke, DVT, depression, weight gain, headaches, migraines, even breast cancer. And ironically, while the availability of contraception can lead to an increase in sexual liberation, one of the most common side effects is decreased libido. It's almost unsurprising then that large numbers of women are turning their backs on medical interventions and choosing instead to use more passive, less robust forms of avoiding pregnancy. The question is, are the risks worth it? This is Trish Hann for the Skeptic Zone.
Sziasztok!
Всем привет!
Hejsa allihop! Guys, I just had the most amazing experience.
What experience, Andras?
Andras, have you been to the pub? I told you not to hang out with Marsh. You know he was blessed by Peter Popov.
No, Yelena, I'm not talking about psychics. It was a real ESP experience.
You have been to the pub. Either that or you've been smoking something.
No, Pontus. The ESP is the European Skeptics podcast. It's the most amazing thing. You get to know so much about skeptics and their activities across Europe. You know, events, hot topics, and interviews with lots of interesting people.
Oh wow, cool. By the way, Pontus, you just committed the false dichotomy fallacy.
I guess that means I'm really wrong.
Yep. And you can even learn about those fallacies on the show and hear about people spreading silly ideas. You should really check it out. It's the ESP, the European Skeptics Podcast. It's on every week.
Alright, so where can I get this ESP experience? It sounds good.
You can go online at theesp.eu, follow it on Twitter at espodcast_EU, or like the podcast on Facebook. Oh, and you can also contact the show by sending them an email to info@theesp.eu. And if you want to subscribe, do a quick search for the European Skeptic Podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, or Stitcher.
I don't know how you can believe.
You know how some of the medicines you see in drugstores are sometimes labeled as homeopathic? You might have heard somewhere that homeopathy is a natural way to treat things like colds, the flu, aches and pains, sleeplessness, and a million other things. Let's just get this out of the way right now. Homeopathy is bunk. It's based on a bizarre idea from the 1700s that water molecules have memory, in which dangerous substances are diluted so much that the ingredients literally aren't there anymore. It doesn't work. It can't work. It's fake medicine. And this is important. Drug retailers, they know this, but they sell this stuff anyway. This is why the Center for Inquiry, that's us, is suing CVS, the largest drug retailer in the country, for fraud. Yeah, that's right. Fraud. Here's why. CVS is marketing and selling useless homeopathic products right alongside real evidence-based medicine under sections labeled cold and flu or sleep aids or what have you. On CVS's website, homeopathic treatments are nested right along with real science-based FDA-approved medicines. For consumers, there's nothing to distinguish the fake medicine from the real thing, because their pharmacy, CVS, has lumped them all together. This needs to stop. CVS is exploiting people's fears about chemicals and side effects while using their reputation as a major pharmacy to trick people into buying untested, ineffective fantasy products. It's time to put a stop to the deception and give people the facts. That's exactly what we're going to do. To learn more about the Center for Inquiry and our case against CVS, go to centerforinquiry.org/CVS.
We're here with Beth Darlington. Hello, Beth.
Hello, how are you, Richard?
I'm really well. We've just had a lot of fun with that Goose Maynard. We've been filming a promo for Skepticon.
Yes, can't wait. It's going to be so good.
And we're doing a panel with Sue Blackmore, Sam Hutchinson and Carrie Poppy, all about classic skepticism, the good old stuff, UFOs and cryptids and ghosts, and I love that stuff.
Psychics as well, mustn't forget them.
Well, how could we? Is that where your interest came about?
My interest has been on the possibility of items and moving without, having a natural explanation that we know of yet. And also from a psychic perspective, how people appear to actually know about other people what they wouldn't know about, information and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's sort of stemmed from there. But, of course, critical thinking is a dying art when it comes to the paranormal. So I'm hoping to bring that back like sexy. So
I think you're right, and I think you'll really enjoy some of the other people we have on the panel with us. All of us, I think, have had quite a bit of experience in the good old classic stuff, the stuff I love. UFOs is where I really got into it years ago, and Bigfoot. I mean, I grew up in the 70s, and that's when it was all really happening, right?
Oh, gosh, I'm jealous, so jealous.
Oh, I don't know. You grew up in the 70s, Maynard. Are you jealous?
Oh, look, but I am a bit psychic. I know a lot about the Baldwin brothers that I shouldn't.
We'll just leave that there. Folks, come and meet Beth and myself and maybe even Maynard at Skepticon 2018. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Here are some more announcements. Science Week is approaching, and I can't wait. I love Science Week every year. We have the Mystery Investigators with Maynard and myself and my friend Ian Bryce. We perform at the Australian Museum. We have been doing that for years now. This is where, long-time listeners will remember, we do the live science show for school groups, and Maynard at one stage will be standing on my back as I lie down on a bed of nails playing the trombone, much to the shock and delight of the school kids. Looking forward to that. But also so many other great things to get involved with Science Week. And my friend Frankie Lee, hi Frankie, has let me know that over at the Powerhouse Museum on the 9th of August, there's going to be a Speed Meet the Scientist night. This is where you get a room full of scientists, and they're all sitting at little desks, and you can sit down and chat with them for a minute or two and then move on and chat to the next scientist. That should be a lot of fun. I'll be there to interview some scientists myself, and if you come along, who knows, I might interview you too. I'll put a link in this week's show notes, but if you head for sydneyscience.com.au, I'm sure you can find out more. Now, you would have heard more information about the upcoming Australian Skeptics Convention, Skepticon, in October 13th and the 14th. And I would encourage you, if you're coming along to that, to buy your tickets now. Get in nice and early. Well, it's not too early. The convention's coming up quicker than you think. If you are coming, or even if you're not coming, it would be a wonderful thing if you could help us promote the event. So tweet it, Facebook it, talk about it. The link is convention.skeptics.com.au. Lots of wonderful speakers, some of whom you've heard. We'll have more interviews with speakers coming up over the next weeks here on the Skeptic Zone. It's going to be a lot of fun. So if you could tweet it, Facebook it, or whatever you can do, it all helps the convention. On next week's show, we're going to be hearing about the New Zealand Skeptics Convention coming up in November this year. Also, we'll be catching up with Claire Klingenberg, who will be heading for Scotland. Now there's a story. And, well, who knows what else. It's always a bit of a mystery. But for now, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Now, oh, hello. Yes, it's Maud the Skeptic Zone cat. What do you want? Yes, it's a new microphone. Do you want to see it? She wants her back scratched. And now, are you going to get back to work and do some sub-editing on the Skeptic Zone?